Okay, so here we go. Back. So we are in the middle of the session 3, Innovation and Conservation, with Nichele, Venkitachalam, Amelie Faraud, just before that, privates with you now, Maricruz, Calvo, Fong, and we'll finish with Fabian Baumgartner. It will be also private. Part of this presentation for the jury, we have Robin Fayetaz from Ifremer Lorient, researcher there, Marie-Yasmine Botin, professor at Ecosys at Université Côte d'Azur, and me, also myself, part of this jury. And I would like to thank a lot the reviewers of your papers. It's a lot of work, so thank you very much to Robin Fayetaz, to Luisa Mangelacho, professor at Ecosys, Nathanael Guigo, associate professor at ICN, David Broussard from Eversea, and Florian Bréhin, project manager at Créocéan, and Hubert Bonnefond, CEO of Darwin Evolution, and Frédéric Villers, project manager at OFB, and me. Okay. So thank you very much for your time. I think we're good, Maricruz. You have the next 15 minutes. Enjoy.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Well, my name is Maricruz Calvo. Today I'm here to share part of the results of my internship with Blue Seeds that are related to the financial viability of blue carbon projects, taking the example of a mangrove restoration project in Guinea-Bissau. First up, the high levels of greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide had led to an increase in efforts to reduce these emissions. So first up, avoidance, reduction of activities that emit these gases, and in a more innovative way, through the restoration of ecosystems that sequester these gases. I'm sorry, I think it looks like I am muted or not? No? Okay, sorry. So this had led to the emergence of a dynamic carbon market that is supported also by a legal framework based on the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement that motivate countries to establish their national targets to reduce their greenhouse gases, and also incentivizing voluntary initiatives within the countries, specifically emphasizing on blue carbon ecosystems that are mangroves, seagrasses, and salt marshes and have great carbon sequestration potential. So diving on the voluntary carbon market, we have the market that is a platform for organizations and individuals to offset or to support sustainability efforts through the buying of carbon credits. One carbon credit equals to 1 ton of CO2 equivalent sequestered or reduced from the environment thanks to a project. In this presentation, the project would be the mangrove restoration. And mangroves have 3 carbon pools: above ground, below ground, and soil organic carbon. Soil organic carbon is the one that sequesters the most carbon for longer periods of time. However, it is usually excluded from these projects because it's technically difficult to monitor. And this is highly relevant because the efficiency of these projects is going to depend on accurately quantifying the carbon sequestration. Now, this whole scheme has been seen as an opportunity to fund environmental conservation and also the sustainable development of communities. But yet, it is an imperfect financial mechanism. The rapid increase of numbers of projects being certified had also recent questions regarding to how effective these projects really are, and also how do they distribute the benefits? Are the communities getting benefits from these projects? Parallel to that, we have other challenges. First up, the limited technical expertise. It is hard to get information on this, and it is not usually accessible. Then we have the high investment cost in the early stages and the long waiting times from the beginning of the project until the community or the project developer receive the first revenue from the credits. So there is a need for greater clarity and transparency in the projects, and that's why I aim to evaluate the financial viability of a mangrove restoration project under different scenarios. Taking the case study of Guinea-Bissau, in this country, communities have traditionally depend on rice cultivation. To do that, they had exploited mangroves. So they changed the hydrology of the site in order to create rice paddies. recent socioeconomic transitions had led them to depend on cashew plantations. As a result, we have a lot of abandoned rice farms. So if we restore the hydrology of these places, mangroves could regenerate naturally, and we can submit this as a carbon credit project. This would be enhancing the ecosystem and also the community's resilience. Taking this as our case study, we developed a carbon model. Don't be scared, I'll explain. So it's based on a Gompertz equation, that is the equation that you can see here. And by inputting global carbon estimates into this equation, we aim to have something like this, okay? So into this equation, we have this part that is the maximum carbon density that the mangrove could theoretically reach. Here, we're going to have our global carbon estimates for the 3 carbon pools that I mentioned before. And then we have parameters that are already standardized by the model according to the carbon pool. Here, we assume a 500-hectare project, which is very, very small in the context of the project. This data was integrated into a financial model. This financial model took into consideration the cost and revenues of a 30-year passive restoration project. And it considers all the phases, from the development to the monitoring. So first off, we have an ideation phase that is more of logistics. Then we have the hydrological restoration. And then we have the first credit issuance in 2032. In this year, communities or project developers will receive the money. As you can see, there's a big waiting gap. That is a challenge that I had mentioned before. And after that, we have the other 22 years of the project that are more of monitoring. During this financial model, we assumed that the certifying agency would be Plan Vivo due to the scale of the project. And they require a 20% risk buffer in case of leakage that I can further develop in the question section. And they also require a minimum of 60% of the revenues allocated towards the communities. Additionally, we also accounted for a 10% contingency buffer, 2% annual inflation rate, and within this financial model, we have our scenarios. I know it's a lot, but the computer was like,
It's 2%.
Computer got
Hold on, everything is on pause, don't worry. Yeah. There is a magic button that you don't have to press, but
sorry.
we are funny, we don't tell you which one. Okay.
And I still managed to press it. Okay. So we have several scenarios, as I was mentioning. First off, we have the carbon scenario.
Excuse me to interrupt. I just don't have the slide on remote anymore.
You can continue and crystallize.
So the carbon scenarios are considering soil organic carbon or not, just to have both scenarios. Then have benefit sharing scenarios. That means how much will the community receive? A 60%, that is the minimum, or a bit more. And finally, we have a carbon credit price scenario. Why? Because markets, the price in the market is volatile and product developers cannot control that. So we set up $20, $40, and $60 per carbon credit. And as a result, as by analyzing the data first, we get the carbon stocks of above ground, below ground, and soil organic carbon. And from this, we created 2 carbon scenarios without soil organic carbon and with soil organic carbon. Within this, the benefit sharing percentages and the prices. These would be our 12 scenarios. And from this, we analyzed the financial viability. How did we analyze that? By calculating the community net revenue, how much are they going to directly get, the profit, that is the revenue of the project developers once all the costs are covered, and other parameters that I won't get into detail due to time constraints, but we could discuss them in the question section. And with all this, we define the financial viability of this scenario. What does this mean? Well, one scenario was financially viable when with the revenue of the carbon credits, it could cover all the costs within less than 10 years. Okay? Now, in the results, we have the carbon stocks that, as we were expecting, the soil organic carbon here in brown was very high in comparison to above ground in green and below ground. Now, this trend also followed when comparing our two carbon scenarios, with and without, and now incorporating this data into the financial model, it gets a bit complicated. Why? Because we have a wide range of prices and different benefit sharing scenarios. So our project could be landing in any of these scenarios. And as you can see, there's a lot of variability that would create uncertainty to the project developers. Now, which of these scenarios are actually viable? First off, 75 share without considering soil organic carbon is not viable, and a 60% share with low carbon credit price, is also not viable. Then a 60% share with higher carbon credit prices, it's a viable scenario. Our viable scenarios ranging between 4 and 6 million towards communities during the whole project, so 30 years. Now, if we consider soil organic carbon, 75% towards community is still not viable regarding the price. However, 60% with low carbon credit price, it's viable. And then we have 60% with $40 and $60 price. And as you can see, the amount towards the community and the profit of the project developers increases significantly. Now, these results give us the methodological, ecological, and financial uncertainties that project developers have to deal with. And they have to consider them all in order to improve the accuracy and the viability of the project itself. Going into methodological considerations, we use global carbon estimates. And carbon sequestration is something that varies a lot, depending on the site, the meteorology, the anthropogenic conditions, the soil characteristics. So it would be advised to use specific country level data. However, when we go into the literature and we see the country level data, we see that first off, it's reported with different units than the estimates usually reported in. And there are discrepancies. It doesn't make much sense. And we need to clear this discrepancy. And this highlights the need for national carbon estimates and further research in carbon data. Now, this variability of the carbon data also translates into financial variability because they won't know how much their project would be making, and they don't know if it would be viable or not. That's why projecting revenues and also setting community benefit thresholds needs to be done with caution. As you saw in the results, higher prices were more viable. However, we cannot rely on a high price because it induces risk in the project planning, and it also challenges, it's a limitation when securing buyers. The financial robustness can be enhanced by including soil organic carbon because it increases the revenues. And this could be also used as an opportunity for project developers to increase the capacity building of communities. And also a blended finance approach would be great in order to not only depend, well, it's not a good advice to depend only on one source of revenue. So also complementing carbon credits with other sources of revenue would enhance the financial robustness and viability. Now, this doesn't mean that we should not give more benefits to the communities. It's the total opposite. This means that if we cannot give 75 to communities, we should enhance the other community benefits. We should advocate for beyond entry-level roles when developing a project. We should emphasize on the capacity building of the locals, and we should advocate also for inclusivity, not during the project, but also in decision-making. And ensure free, prior, and informed consent. This means that we have a legal agreement where every member of the community knows what are the project about and what are their benefits. This will foster the engagement of the community and would also enhance the project sustainability in the long run. To conclude, financial viability is highly affected by investment gaps, especially in the early stages of the project, by price volatility that project developers cannot control, and by uncertainties in the carbon stock due to the carbon data that we have. And this financial viability needs to be aligned with the ecological and social objectives. By the project developers taking adaptive strategies, for example, the blended financing and transparent financial planning as well, they could make carbon credits an opportunity to foster sustainable development of the community and the ecosystem. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to you, Yasmin, and we'll go to Robin, coming back to me. But before that, no, don't worry. Mila.
Oh, yes, of course.
Of course.
Of course.
Do you know if mangroves are now protected?
Yeah. Yeah, their mangroves, it depends a lot on the country. Because, for example, let's say Costa Rica, mangroves are part of the countries. They don't have an owner. The country is the owner. So they can create national parks or marine protected areas, and that's to enhance protection. But for example, in a country such as Guinea-Bissau, they are not owned by the country. They have customary laws that means that if a community was there for a long time enough, they belong to the community. So if they want to say, okay, we want to have a rice paddy here, we're going to cut the mangroves and do that, they can do it. So they are protected, but depending on the context of the country. And there are also international agreements, for example, Ramsar sites that protect mangroves, but at more a global scale.
Yes, totally, and it depends on the country. Thank you. Yasmin, your time.
You mentioned that to assess the viability, you used a 10-year projection. I mean, you needed to have that there must be some revenue over a 10-year period. And I wonder why 10 years in your calculation? Why?
I'm not sure.
You mentioned,
do you refer to this?
Yes, this or maybe the next slide. I forgot where it was mentioned. No, it was after that when you made the calculation. You mentioned that to be able to assess the viability.
For the financial viability,
yes.
I determined that was the definition that I established. Yeah, sorry, I didn't understand.
Yeah, why 10 years?
10 years because if you see the gap between the year of the start, the beginning of the project, and the first year of revenue, that's already 8 years. So I considered, okay, if I say that the project is going to be viable by 1 year, there's no viable scenario, right? So I determined by analyzing the scenarios that if it was 10 years, it was quite okay for communities to wait 2 years after they receive revenue.
Okay.
So that's how I determine it.
Could you go back to the slide 10 and 11? You went fast, and I haven't, as it's not my field, it takes me some time to integrate all that and explain them again, please.
Yes, for sure. So here we have the carbon stock, the cumulative carbon stock. That means once the mangrove is restored, how much carbon they would sequester, cumulative, okay? So, for example, below ground, we see the line here that it progressively slowly, since this carbon pool is smaller. Then we have above ground that it's a bit higher, and you can see how it slowly increases because it takes in consideration the process of restoring. So it's not the same amount of carbon that an old mature mangrove will sequester than one that is in the process of restoring with more small plants and such. And here we have the soil organic carbon that, as you can see, it has a rapid increase, but that might be biased by an assumption that we make. To do this, we assume that our lands, the initial state, it would be 0 carbon and DH 0 due to the land use that they had before, because they were used for rice paddies. If I could change this, I would go into the field, I would measure it, I would use that baseline, but we didn't have the means to do that. So we assume 0, and that's why you see a rapid increase. And the sequestration rate is way higher, and we can see it here. And then after a while, if we continue projecting, it would reach more of a stable line.
And if the next one, I know that, well, it was then it's the SNEM. Now I understand then this one.
Yeah, this would be above ground plus below ground, and this would be this plus soil organic carbon.
So one of the idea behind this would be to then replace some rice culture with mangrove, correct?
The rice cultures are already abandoned. So the idea is just to restore them, as they are not using them as for rice. So we restore the hydrology, the mangrove comes in naturally, and we give them a source of revenue. Because if we don't give the communities a source of revenue, they would cut the mangroves again, because they would need the economic incentive. So that's a way of also enhancing conservation within the community.
Okay. And in the case where it would be a replacement, how would you take into account the carbon that would be released, such as in rice, when we know that there is a negative impact of rice production in terms of gas emission? There's also use of water when you use for this type of culture. Would you have a suggestion of a model that could introduce this additional benefit compared to other type of culture? I don't know if it's clear. Let's say you have a rice culture and that you want to encourage to replace it to quit culturing the rice and then to encourage to have more mangrove. What type of financial calculation, how could you introduce not only the value of the mangrove, but also to take into account the fact that there will be less methane production, less water use, because there's a lot of other environmental negative impact of agriculture?
Well, I think that's a very complex question and project. I have to do a whole analyze. First off, this is just carbon. So methane is another story. So we would have to do analysis. First off, how much does a rice paddy represent for the community economically, to see how much they would be technically losing, and then do an environmental assessment of what are the benefits, what are the negative consequences of these rice paddies, and if the mangrove restoration would change these negative effects, and in how long. Because that's another thing. Mangrove would naturally restore, so it will take a while. It won't be the next year. So I think it's a complex analysis that we would have to do, but it's a very interesting.
I'm not expecting for a clear answer, but more of that's what you express is that, and you mentioned also this is only carbon, and we know carbon is not the only issue that we have to tackle, and there are other issues, such as, for example, mangrove will introduce biodiversity, etc. And it is important to have this more global aspect, and I think you got it perfectly.
I think even within this project, including methane as well, would increase the amount that the communities will get, but it's hard to ensure the right monitoring for these emissions, because for example, there are methodologies to assess the soil organic carbon, but they are not so easy to apply. And then you have, in an ideal project, we would like for communities to do it, so they would have the ownership of the project. And so it's hard to get through the line, but I think that would be ideal to monitor everything. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go to you, Robin. I will conclude.
Thank you, Maricruz, for the presentation. It's very interesting. It's really not my topic, so I hardly know anything about all this. So I have very general questions. So first, the easy one, you said you would address it in the question. What about the risk buffer of 20% that that is considered?
Yes, so first off, Plan Vivo allocates a 20% risk buffer in case that the emissions are reversed. So, for example, if we restore a mangrove forest and then the communities cut or anyone cuts the mangrove trees, we would be emitting emissions, and we cannot have carbon credits due to that. So that buffer is in case that when you are going to report how much you sequestered, you realize that you don't sequester, so they would take the money from there. And then we have the 10% contingency buffer that is just for, I'm not a finance expert, but when I was developing this, they assessed me and they said that by including 10% is like a way to have like a risk, I don't want to say a risk buffer because that's what it said, but it's to have like a range of money in case the budget was not accurate, because the budget is many times our estimations that when you go and implement it is not very accurate. And as you can see, I have very long, it's a lot of years. So the price that, even though I accounted for inflation rate, the price that I am estimating now might not be the same like for next year even. So that's why we included the 10% to be like conservative.
Okay, thank you. And what about so there's the 60% revenue for the local community.
Yeah.
Is that also something that the Plan Vivo sets, or it's standard for any project like that?
No, it's something particular of Plan Vivo, and that's very distinctive of this certifying agency, because the other ones, they don't have a minimum towards communities. And I think, I know this is out of the question, but just as a personal comment, I think this is one effectiveness questioning comes in when talking about carbon credits.
Okay. And still again in the same type of question. So you showed the different revenues that may be expected in the variable scenarios. I don't know, I think it ranged from 600,000 to a few millions. How is that relevant for the local community based on the area of the project? Is that huge incomes? Is that low income? How many people does that represent? And overall?
Yeah. Well, so first off, the community net revenue, it represents a lot, because I'm going to bring us back to the context that we are in a developing country, and we're talking about communities that depend on cashew plantations, which don't make a lot of revenue. So it's really a lot. And then we also have the profit. So the profit would be more for project developers. Like if you want to expand the project to have another project in another area or things like that, this money is super useful to pull down initial investment gap. So yeah, I think it's very relevant, or to do further research in order to enhance the sequestration of the project.
And area based, do you know if the net revenue for the community is higher than when they were exploiting for rice field? Or
I don't know, because I haven't calculated the rice profit. It would be a very interesting work, but I didn't do it, so I'm not sure. However, since they migrated from rice to cashew is giving them more revenue. It's not very good for the environment, but
yeah, not for the people, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
Robin. Sorry, I have to go ahead. I also have a few questions, but it's follow-up questions on the community net revenues. Here, these values, I may have missed that again and again, but as it per year or per work project?
For the total,
but what is the total about?
30 years.
30 years?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so the profits that you want to divide it by 30, okay.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Okay. So some other questions have been answered. So maybe on slide 16, you were talking about, it's not just a slide, but you were talking about discrepancies. And you were talking about the units here, especially. So is it just a problem of units? And if it's just a problem of units, why is it complex to just convert CO2 into carbon? What's the problem with that?
Yeah, maybe I didn't communicate it effectively. The problem is not the units. So these were the units in which they were reported. And if you compare these two numbers, you would be like, well, they are pretty similar. But when you convert CO2 equivalent into carbon, you see that the values that they have reported is way low, like too low.
So the value that you've got below is the value that you have calculated from their original?
No. The values of the global data are the values that are used in the model that are global estimates that usually underestimate because not all the mangroves can sequester in the same rate, so they prefer to underestimate. However, due to the conditions of Guinea-Bissau, we know that they would be making more than this. When we see the data, it reports that it is not more, that is less, significantly less, actually.
So it's not a problem of units, it's a problem of study.
Yeah.
Okay.
Here, I did some literature review, and as you can see, I've tried to compile information on country level data, and then regional, and then global. And when we graph that, these would be the data that they reported compared to the one in pink, that is the one of the global estimate. So it's, yeah.
Okay. Also, you talked about blended finance as an opportunity.
Yeah.
Is it a way for you to open the door for a question from me? Like, what type of blended finance are you talking about? Like, what do you put into that? You say that blended finance can be an option because we cannot only rely on that. So how could you pull other sources of revenues?
Yes, that's actually a very hard question. That's the question
You
that
open the floor
we want to. Yeah, that's true. Okay. By blended finance, I mean, what are you trying to say is that we cannot say, okay, stop doing cashew plantations, stop doing rice plantations, we're just going to restore, and that's how you're going to survive for the rest of your life. So even though cashew plantations have their impact, we can reduce the amount that they are cultivating now, but still have a little bit of cashew, have a little bit of rice, and then try to have a more integrated approach and finance revenue. And I would also say, like, philanthropy. However, I don't want communities or anything to rely just on philanthropy income, you know? So, there are also other...
The carbon that you're talking about is not philanthropy money.
No, I would say to complement the carbon, to use philanthropy funding. But yeah, and that's a lot of the problem that we have with conservation, that we would need to diversify sources of revenue, but how do we do that? Where does that money come from? So I guess in the coming years, there would be developing new and more innovative financing mechanisms. For example, with corals, I know there's one scheme like with insurance. So that could be one finance mechanism that maybe we can try to apply with mangroves. I think we need to figure out which mechanism.
Hold on, because I think my last question is another metaphysical conservation question. Here you're considering, if I'm not mistaken, passive restoration only. Okay. So what do you think about the possible opportunity of an active restoration where we actively plant mangrove? So what will be the cost of that, if you have any idea? And what about the relevance of this added cost for active restoration, specifically on the site?
Yeah, thank you for that question. That's really...
I'm happy with this.
That's really interesting, actually, because active restoration is what projects usually do, because it gives you a result like more right away. However, the costs are really high to the benefit that you obtain because they have high mortality rates, and it involves a lot of labor on it. So that's why we are advocating for a one-time intervention that would enable a natural regeneration. That would be, yeah.
Okay. Thank you. That's all from me. So, you guys, 1 or 2 questions from you. Mangroves.
Yeah.
In that case, you said that they moved from rice plantations to cashews. So the cashews, they take less space, or they're somewhere else, or how is it that so much rice plantations are left abandoned?
Cashews are inland plant, so they don't threaten the mangroves. They cultivate it inland. Yeah, so basically the rice paddies are abandoned, and they have huge extensions of cultivation of cashew.
They also need a lot of water. How is that a problem?
Yeah, they also need a lot of work. Yeah.
Okay.
Deforestation of all
Yes.
the plants.
Yeah, in ecosystemic wise, it represents well, they're losing all the natural and autochthon native biodiversity, because everything is turning into a monoculture culture. So
Okay, thank you.
Another question? Yes.
Is there a way, I mean, everything is already so complicated, but like just in general, is there a way to also, or is it done to also include in like the viability calculations, the benefits in terms of like the ecosystem services that the restored mangrove would also provide to the community?
I'm not sure because standalone ecosystem services are hard to monetize or valorize. So I haven't seen one that includes it. It would be an interesting approach, and I think it could be done, but I haven't seen it. Yeah.
Okay, and then we're all good, Maricruz. Thank you.
Services is that no one pays.
Well, so
Because
for
I
those
need to do-
online, we have to
Propose
put on the live here. The next presentation will be you this afternoon.
Because Nichele has a lot of competition on that. It was like, no.